I'm the Associate Superintendent of Middle Schools. Welcome to this referendum presentation this evening. I would like to bring up the principal of Badger Rock Middle School, Joey Roses, and he will give us an introduction.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you for being here. You know, it's always a great time to just get people together, share a story, connect. So I appreciate you all being here. And in this case, you know, regarding the referendum and having discussions and answering questions about the referendum. Before I go, you are standing in Southside and Badger Rock Middle School and Rooted. So this space right here is very unique because through those doors is primarily Southside Elementary. Here and above is Badger Rock Middle School. And then the neighborhood center, which is Rooted, is right behind us, the doors you came through. So we're in a very unique area here, which I want to celebrate because it's three entities essentially who are sharing space and working together. Just a little bit about me before I'm not going to go too long, I swear, I told like less than 5 minutes. So I was born and raised in Madison, north side of Madison, went to MSD schools, Lakeview, Blackhawk, and East High School. So when we think about buildings and referenda and space that our students are in, I want you all to ask yourselves as well. Think about your neighbors, nephews, nieces, your own children. And think about that because my kids go to MSD, and they deserve a modern education facility. They deserve a space that they can be proud of when they drive past it. That's my school. So I want you all, I challenge you all to just keep putting yourself in that seat as we are going into this discussion. Yeah, I guess besides that, I just want to welcome you all here. There's Hetty here from Rooted, and she's going to wave her hand. So there's myself, principal of Badger Rock, and of course we have a number of MSD people here as well. So thank you all for being here. I will be around in and out, and if you have any questions about the space, it's a really unique space here. So welcome.
Thank you. We really appreciate your time, you spending time with us today to learn more about our facilities in the 2024 referenda. Your thoughts, feedback, and ideas will help shape what's next for MMSD as we work together to build a bright future. Again, thank you, Mr. Roses, for your introduction. And I would also like to recognize our current and any former elected officials. If you're in this space, please stand. And we have any board members. I think Ms. Laura Simpkin is here. And I'm going to introduce Laura Simpkin, our board member, and she will have a few words for you as well.
Hello, everyone. Laura Simpkin, one of your school board members. I'm so glad to see all of you here tonight to find out more about these incredibly critical referendum that we have put on the ballot for November 5th, and to give you a chance to ask your questions. And so I just want to encourage you to be engaged in this conversation. We're going to have plenty of time for you to just take a pause moment and stop and think about what you want to ask, and then we'll get a chance to answer those questions. I am going to keep this really short because there's a lot of information coming your way. So again, just a lot of appreciation for being here. Thank you.
So we're going to have a brief presentation on funding, on our funding outlook and condition of our facilities. Then we'll discuss the referendum questions approved by the Board of Education. I lost my spot. Okay, so on your table, oh, interpreters in the room. We have Spanish interpreter, Hmong interpreter, as well as AL. So if you
ASL, American Sign
oh,
Language.
excuse me, ASL. There's only an L here. ASL. Thank you for that correction. So a bit of a housekeeping. There are some note cards on your table with some writing utensils available to you to write any of your questions that you might have during the presentation, and we'll respond to those questions later tonight. So as you write down questions on there, you can raise your hand and we'll come around and we'll pick those up so that we can address those questions throughout the night. So I know we have Jen over here is picking up. Is there any other people from MMSD picking up? So there as well. Let's share a little background about MMSD. MMSD has more than 25,000 students with 52 schools and over 6,000 staff members. These are demographic breakdowns of our student body. About 60% of our students identify in one of the racial categories defined by the state. And of note, because so many of you have some experience in Madison, in 1970, ooh, that's a long time. If you were looking at the same list, it would be only 13%. To highlight the student diversity within our schools now, right? So we've really grown and we've really changed a lot. There are 100,000 more people in Madison since 1970, and 13% of those were students of color in the district at that time, and today, again, it's 60% students of color. You can see our English language learners, again, continues to go up, and our economically disadvantaged collected by students who qualify for free and reduced meals, and that has hovered right around 50% for some time now. Next slide. MMSD has a tradition of excellence and opportunities. As you can see some of the highlights that we offer. We have 21 schools that are dual language immersion, and 61% of our high schools have students who earn credit before graduation. That has gone up remarkably over the years. We still continue to offer string instruments in early elementary. We have 26 National Merit Scholars, and we set a record in our district in terms of the number of advanced placement tests taken. Last year, students go to the Alliance Center and spread out, and through a very rigid testing schedule, are able to take advanced placement tests. We have 27 schools who offer 4K of our 32 schools, and multilingual education and well-rounded opportunities, offering a diverse array of co-curricular activities and expanded career and technical education programming to allow for hands-on learning experiences and exploration. And we build a strong culture and climate. MMSD held 14 input sessions this winter and spring, in the winter and the last spring. And we've also conducted a survey with 4,000 plus responses from MMSD families, students, and community members. So, staffing is a priority. Staff retention, compensation, and working conditions. Understanding, renovate, or build now, which is community focused on middle schools in need of improvement. Along with the addition of a new high school, we're interested in creating flexible learning spaces, as well as providing a comfortable learning environment. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, most needed facilities improvements. Right now, we're going to watch a budget video around the budget process of public school districts. It's very, very complex. And you will learn some information about how that system works.
Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. In the Madison Metropolitan School District, with roughly 25,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $82 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. We work hard to balance our budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operational referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school funding by visiting our website.
Bob Solder, and he's going to take it from here. Thank you.
I'm doing some
He has
important
set his
housekeeping.
timer.
Set my timer because for those that know me, I can get a little winded sometimes. Good evening, Bob Solder. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Financial Services at the district. And we want to continue to encourage you to write your questions on the postcards. I want to talk a little bit, debrief you a little bit about the video you just saw on school finance. And so school finance in Wisconsin, the video was talking about, really starts with revenues, right? The available, ongoing, sustainable revenues that districts, Madison included, have each year available for them to run their operations. A couple of highlights from that video. It talks about, at one time, when revenue limits were first put in place in the late 90s, the revenue increases, sustainable ongoing revenues, was matched to CPI, indexed to inflation. So as your costs went up, your revenues went up in terms of indexing inflation on costs, staff increases, just general increases that all businesses have, including the district. And so the legislature initially created that to include inflationary increase on revenues. And it's also tied to student membership. And so the second part, which the video doesn't talk as much about, is as revenue decreases in your district and in the state of Wisconsin, about 2/3 of the districts are decreasing in revenues. The way the formula was originally created, as you lose a student and lose revenue, you don't have the reduction in cost. So the revenue limits as designed really are imbalanced on the revenue side. The good thing is, the legislature said to school boards, if you would like sustainable revenues, or if you would like to invest in updating your school facilities, providing raises to your employees, expanding four-year-old kindergarten, doing multilingual programs, you can go to your voters and ask your voters to give you that ongoing revenue. Sustainable revenues, plus revenues to invest in the programs and priorities of your communities. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics in terms of the operations where the board, based on community interest and desires, have invested in commitments to excellence in terms of full-day four-year-old kindergarten and the other programs. But we'll talk a little bit about revenues now, right? And so the slide talks about what's been going on with the revenues in Madison for the last 2 years. Last year, school year 23-24, our revenue limit was down $20.8 million in 23-24 alone, had those revenue limits been tied to inflation. This year, we're projecting them to be down a little under $9.5 million. So in the 2 years, 23-24, and this year, 24-25, we're projecting the need a funding gap of $30.2 million. Had our revenue been tied to inflation, like the revenue limits when they were first created. Talk a little bit more about a funding gap in the terms of some of the educational programming for special education. Back in the mid-70s, the federal government passed Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. That law was a great step forward for students. It said if a student needs individual services in an individualized education program, school districts would be required to provide that education. Madison has, from the very beginning, been an inclusive school environment for kids that have been identified for additional services under the special education law. The issue with that is the federal government, when they passed that law, they initially said they'd give us 40% of those costs. From the 1970s to now, the feds have given anywhere from 10 to 13% of the costs to reimburse, which creates a funding gap. Madison does a great job, needs to, does it, inclusive environment for students, but has costs that have to be made up from revenue within the system. At the same time the federal government passed that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the state had a similar law put into place to mirror the federal law, and also said at the time, where the state of Wisconsin will share in the local school district costs, which makes a lot of sense. No matter where the child lives, the school district's required to provide the additional services, but the state will share in those costs. Initially, the state said they were going to share about 2/3 of that, but they said, if we don't hit 2/3, you just take the money we decide to give you and you'll get a certain percentage of that money. Well, last year, that percentage of money was 31%, 30 cents on the dollar. Combination all in terms of a funding gap created by state law, $66.4 million we needed to take from our general fund pot of money to pay for the cost of those services. Again, services that were needed, services that are important to provide, services that Madison does a great job at providing, but creates a funding gap in the flow of revenues and how you balance a school system. It's not unique to Madison. Statewide last year was $1.5 billion across the school districts providing these services. I also like to say about this time, the state legislature has collected billions of dollars in income tax and has chosen not to share in the cost of its public education in terms of the programs for students, in terms of the revenue limits, right? So the revenues exist. It's a priority of the legislature to share in the cost of the local public school, which is something we'll continue to work on as we move forward. Finally, in terms of a funding gap, I want to talk about four-year-old kindergarten in terms of how the law treats a four-year-old kindergarten. So we talked about the Madison School Board investing in full-day four-year-old kindergarten, four-year-old child, whole day of cost. The state treats a four-year-old kindergarten as a half a child, a 0.5 in the revenue limit formula and a 0.5 in terms of state aid. So although we have costs for a full-day program, the state, by definition, state law, says that child is worth a 0.5. Creates a funding gap again, right? Full cost, half the revenue necessary to provide those costs. Okay, I want to switch a little bit over to facilities in terms of what the district has done recently. The Madison School Board for the last several years has raised taxes, $5 million for a specific fund that can only be used for facility operations in terms of maintenance and improvements, right? Since 2008 in total, the board has levied $93 million specifically to maintain our facilities, which is good. 93 million is a lot of money. However, when you have 52 school buildings, 26 of those are over 60 years old, you have aging facilities that need continued upkeep. We did a facility condition report last fall, analyzed the 44 schools that were not impacted by the voter-approved referendum in 2020, right, where we renovated our 4 comprehensive high schools, added on to this structure, being the unique structure that is, and built Southside Elementary School, also renovated the Hoyt Elementary School in the near west side for Capitol High School, right? So the point with the board continuing to invest in maintenance and upkeep our facilities is you cannot manage under revenue limits the level of revenues needed to continue to renovate facilities, let alone build new facilities, right? It's one of those questions where you really have to, the law requires the board to ask a question, a referendum question, if they want to build new or renovate facilities. That facilities condition report also pointed out that 40 of our schools are graded a C or a D in terms of their condition, right? And I'm going to talk more as we get in about the priority and how the board determined the 10 schools at the 7 sites. That's part of that facility referendum question. Okay, the ballots. 2 questions are going to be on the ballot on November 5th. They're 2 separate and distinct questions that the board has asked community to consider to provide additional revenues for operations. That's $100 million over 4 years. And the second question, unique and separate, $507 million. And that's for 10 schools at 7 different sites. And so those questions are unique and standalone. The facility dollars cannot be used for anything other than the question of the facilities. So that $66.4 million funding gap I talked about, that cannot be paid for with $507 million in terms of that question. Some of that $100 million in terms of operating funds can be used to fund that dollar, that funding gap of 66.4, but that's on the operations side. So the operating referendum, $100 million, is about sustaining what the board has invested in, but more importantly, continues a commitment to excellence and investment to the future. Slide mentioned about how, the video mentioned about how staff really is what a school district is all about. In Madison, 81% of our costs are for staff, right? Salaries and benefits. And so in order for us to retain our high-quality staff, attract high-quality staff, diversify our teaching, and continue to invest in 4K, the need for sustainable ongoing revenues is critical, right? to continue to expand our multilingual programs. 21 schools have language immersion programs. And the well-rounded education in terms of more than just the courses on the schedule, it's the after-school activities, it's the clubs, it's MSCR, being able to use this space. You can see the rules for MSCR. It's building schools to be community centers like Rooted is here, open to the community and complex, right? Those are critical programs that without the ongoing referendum and ongoing sustainable revenues, the community is at a juncture, a critical juncture, right? Before I get into the details of the $100 million, I want to let you know where we are with our budget right now for the 24-25 budget. The board's made a commitment to continue all what we've talked about. However, the 24-25 budget is balanced on $47 million of one-time revenues, right? Which we have available to sustain the current budget in 24-25. But as I said, we're at a crossroads. Without ongoing sustainable revenues, we don't have sufficient funds to continue the programming that's offered today into the future without voters taking a look at that and saying, sustainable revenues, we understand it. We want you to continue to do what you're doing, and here it is, right? I've been asked the question, well, what happens if the referendums don't pass? And my answer is the same. In November, I'll begin talking to the school board about available, sustainable, ongoing revenues, one number, and one-time revenues. And just like the board does every year, beginning in November of 2024, they'll start budgeting for 25-26. And the first step is always to identify the revenues, then start matching the costs that are your priorities to those available revenues, right? So the first question, the $100 million, over 4 years. So really scaffolds up, starting with $30 million this fall, and the authority to raise taxes. It gives the board the option to use that money. Followed by $30 million in fall of 25, then another $20 million in the fall of 26, followed by an additional $20 million in the fall of 27. So cumulative building up from 30 million to 100 million. The first year, that first 30 million, we're estimating it'll be $26 a month on the tax bill, and then goes up pretty much at a scaffold up phase to $87 a month after that fourth year, and the 100 million is fully built into the revenue base on an ongoing basis. Okay, I was gonna say, I think we're gonna pause pretty quick here. So this is a time where I just covered some of the financing, the overview, the specifics of the operating question. We're gonna go into the facilities question, but right now we're just gonna pause, get some food, some cheese, some fruit, some water, some coffee, write down more questions if you have them, because then we'll collect those and answer those questions. Okay, first question. What steps is the district taking to limit the frequency of future referendums? That's an excellent question. Excellent question. No one can predict the future when it comes to the referendum questions, right? But I'll explain it this way. Over the last year, I've been working with the board. We've had a lot of, Dr. Hicks talked about the community sessions and the listening sessions that we had, identifying what we believe would be ongoing revenues, identify the programs that the board had invested in. And so every year, I'll take a look at what we think available revenues will be the following year, and you try to map that out. Now, there's a couple of things that are changing, hopefully, at the state level, right? There was a time when the state of Wisconsin really did share in the costs of local public schools. The state has moved away from that, as the video explained, and I've tried to explain a little bit. The hope is with fair legislative districts in the next couple of sessions, we'll kind of return to more of a middle ground versus where we're at. But that's at the state level. And in the meantime, we have this system where, and there are a lot of districts that are going to referendum. There are quite a few communities like Madison that have gone several times when they needed additional funds to invest in their facilities, when they needed additional operations to continue to do some of the same things I talked about. Focusing on staff, high-quality staff, 4K, 4-year-old full-day expansion. Remember, we started as half-day, then moved to full-day programs, which is critical for a lot of families. Need that early start for their students. So there's really no way to tell. The last referendums we went to was in 2020 for facilities and for operations. And 4 years later, we're here. But what's going to happen in the future is contingent on really that, right? What is the state going to do, and what does the board determine in terms of programs and what revenues are available? Next question says 2009 adjusted for inflation, 2010 what happened, and adjustment for inflation with Walker, right? So Act 10 back in 10, 11, 11, 12, somewhere in there, gets a little blurry, but it was that time. Two things happened. The legislature decoupled inflationary increases to revenue limits. They also cut all school districts. Statewide, it was $550 per child. In Madison, it was a little bit higher. So not only was it decoupled from inflation, the base of the revenue was shrunk across the state. And what the legislature did at the time was they eliminated collective bargaining and told the boards, we're taking away this revenue and we're going to give you the opportunity to take benefits, have pay cuts, live within this revenue stream, right? So until this last most recent session of the legislature, we went below zero, and then there were a few times when some adjustments were made on a per pupil basis, but those adjustments took that 550 statewide to zero until this last session. So not only were we cut, our base cut, and no inflation, but we remained below what we were at when the legislature and Governor Walker cut all school boards, right? So it's been a real compiling of the issues in terms of state support for public schools. Okay, how much thought was put into how these referendums will affect low-income or fixed-income families? I'll say a lot of thought went into it. We worked for months talking to the board in terms of the budget, the needs that we had as an organization. The board spent a long time talking about it with voters and saying, where does this leave us, right? It's never an easy decision for the board to raise taxes, but in terms of the investments to the communities, in terms of how state law just doesn't match ongoing revenues to the cost of inflation, it's a real difficult position. And again, not unique to just Madison. It's happening across the state because of the way revenue limits work. Then it says, how are the federal funds used, or how do they get used? Most of the federal funds come with strings. Madison gets about 10 cents on the dollar from the federal government. I mentioned the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That money must be used to supplement the programs that have been created to provide the services for the students that need it. The other, what we call title programs, or programs created by the federal government, are for economically disadvantaged families, specifically some for English language learners. So most of the federal money supplements the monies that schools already provide for specific programs. And we have to submit budgets to get those budgets approved and how they're spent, and the state monitors us to make sure we're complying with the federal requirements. And we have the auditors every year look at our books. What grades do the remainders of the schools have? That's a great question. I mentioned the facility condition report. We'll talk about it a little bit more. The facility condition report is on the website. The slide talked about 40 of our schools have C or D. There's not many schools that have a B. Matter of fact, there's only a handful of schools that are graded B. We built Olson Elementary on the far west side 2008, 2009. We used the construction standards of Olson Elementary to be our gauge when we did the facility condition report in terms of matching on 14 different criteria, and I'll talk a little bit more about the criteria. The schools on the facility referendum, our main focus was mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing. So it was the middle schools and a few high priority elementary schools that were identified first and foremost by the infrastructure of the facilities themselves. Well, I tried to upgrade so many schools in one referendum, and what percent of staff live in Madison and pay taxes? I'll answer the question that I know, and we'll put this one on the mark. I'm not sure how many of our staff live in Madison and pay taxes. In terms of why 10 schools at 7 sites for $507 million, that decision was made. We looked at a lot of different options. Before the board made the decision for that $507 million question, I mentioned the facility condition report. In addition to the facility condition report, we updated the long-range facilities plan, and we looked at all of our facilities, right? And the idea was, when the board talked to the community back in 2020 to focus on high schools, the decision was made to first deal with our 6 high school, Shabazz Alternative High School, and then focus on middle schools, right? So that's what this question does. And then in addition, we had a couple of elementary schools, Anana and Crestwood, that were rated as high priority in terms of being at the critical juncture of mechanical failure in terms of the infrastructure of those 2 elementary schools. Were rated as the most difficult schools to maintain the mechanicals on. And so that was the rationale that were used for those schools and dollar amount. Copy of consultant cost breakdown where to get construction costs. Why Sherman School needs floor removed to get boiler out. That's a good question. I don't know. They built that school back in 1928. Oh,
Yeah, one of my buddies owns a company called Deconstruction. You know, it's just, they're either, whoever you got this blowing smoke out of you, but he pulls boilers out all the time. He said it costs like $70,000. You know, you could take the floor out, pull a boiler out. I don't know how many people live in a whole house, I do, but the house was built without pulling boiler. And we didn't rip my house down to take the boiler out.
yeah.
You know, so.
The
that's why I
facilities
wanna
question.
That's why I want to see the
Yeah.
consultant breakdown on dollar amount. I own a lot of property, and when this happens, I have to turn around and raise all my tenants' rent. I understand, you know, giving more money for teachers and stuff, but looking at what you guys are looking at for schools, they're just completely off base. You know,
Sure.
a boiler and air conditioning for all of them, you can, you know, plumb it for that.
Yeah.
You know, you keep talking about mechanical. The schools are built as bomb shelters, they were, and you want to rip them down. And Sherman School's half full. Why would you build a new school when you only got half the students?
Yeah.
And my other thought is, why don't you get some money out of, why don't you sell your school administrative building? They're paying outrageous amount of money, these companies out of Chicago, to buy property. You got some of the most valuable property in Madison.
All very good ideas. All very good
You know,
ideas.
you can move to Sherman School.
Sure.
I just want to understand where is this all coming in. How do I get a copy of the breakdown?
Yep.
I went over to the school board and they just told me to go online, and there was nothing there other than this stuff that you're sending out.
Yeah. So the final piece, so thank you for sharing your thoughts. The final piece of the information that staff, including me, provided to the board was a memo in June that has those details that you talked about. We worked with the construction management company, Fendorf, that's currently finishing up the work from 2020 referendum. We worked with a couple of different architectural firms, and then we worked with our current owners rep, Huffman Keel, a group that helps school districts manage projects. We came up with a square footage to do a couple of things. One, and first and foremost, the focus was on the mechanicals, but the reason the board chose the buildings we did was to focus on middle school and modernize those facilities to provide a modern education, to create flexible classrooms for STEM, to create a modern educational environment, right? And so the buildings we have, Sherman's a great school. You go into it, it feels great. It looks good. It's been maintained as best as it can be maintained, but it's past its useful life. And so the board made the decision, we need to create middle schools that allow our kids to be successful in the world that they're going to be going into. The work that we did at the high schools, if you didn't have a chance to go in there in terms of the art space, the trade space, the science labs, all modern
How do I
standards.
find a copy of, your break?
We'll get, it's,
We'll show you on the website.
yeah, it's on the
When I look on
website.
this site, there's nothing, dollar.
We'll get you,
We'll show it.
yeah, we'll get it.
Lou's coming right around right now.
Okay, enrollment projections do not show an increase. Do we really need all these schools? That's a great question. So I want to talk a little bit about the schools, right? And we'll get to some slides that talk about the geographical location of the 10 schools. We have 12 middle schools in Madison. This referendum question addresses 5 of the middle schools, 4 elementary schools, and Shabazz High School, right? So whether our enrollments stay at about 25,000, and Madison's been about a 25,000 school district for probably 30 years, 3 decades, and probably will continue to be in that range. But the point is this, in terms of the buildings that were picked in the 5 middle schools, no matter what our enrollment does, let's say our enrollment goes down or continues to stay where it's at, we're always gonna need middle schools, and for sure, we're gonna need 5 middle schools. And the board chose geographically located middle schools throughout the district for a couple of reasons. We know our facilities need to be improved for modern academic standards, and we also know we need to be able to plan for the future to find out where those shifts in terms of the demographics are happening and where they're gonna go, right? And so, but that doesn't change the fact that we have aging facilities. It doesn't change the fact that the board is asking the community to consider that and give them the authority to start working on our facilities, right?
It might be more palatable, however, if you were able to say, we targeted these elementary schools to be upgraded because we're going to keep them, but we're also going to shut down these 4 schools.
Yeah.
You know, and you aren't doing that. And it's you know, you're setting yourself up for failure. I'm afraid of this referendum.
Yeah. The board looks at the schools in terms of the staffing and capacity, and so every year, and we've got, we're working on updating our 20-year student enrollment projection, and I talked about the long-range facilities plan. But the fact is, we need the spaces that we have right now based on the populations and where folks live. And there are some schools that are under capacity in terms of their rated capacity in classroom space. But we don't staff the schools based on the capacity of the school, right? We staff the schools based on the number of students that are attending that school. And so the space isn't used, and there's no teacher in the classroom without kids. And at the point where our population is right now, there is no clear path to say we don't need one of these schools. Will the board continue to look at that every year? Absolutely. Is that a possibility? Absolutely, right? But right now, the decision is these 10 schools, include some elementary schools, continue to get the data and make the decisions based on what the future holds, right? Okay, a few more. Oh, go ahead.
Does the facility condition assessment report?
Who did it?
Yeah, who gives A's, B's, C's, D's?
That report's on our website, so it's a combination of people. Our employees, building services folks, some consultants, 2 architectural firms, PRA and design engineers. And it talks about who all was involved in that decision. That facility condition report is the result of an update of work that has been done for years with our building services professionals and the PRA Architects and Design Engineers.
Sorry.
And that report is really thick and it's really long, but it is on our website. This question was, if schools are only at 60% capacity, why not combine schools? We kind of talked about the enrollment and the plan right now. Okay, what is the status of the 2020 referendum operations? Does it continue or does it remove capital? When does it end pay off? So back in 2020, in total, also over 4 years, was $33 million. That's built into the revenue limit base. I want to talk a little bit about what that means, because it's a little bit of a theoretical conversation in terms of the revenue limit law. The capital referendum was $317 million. When the board was given authority from the voters for that $317 million, what that authority is for the questions that, the facilities that are in that question, gives the board the authority to sell general obligation bonds. We sold those general obligation bonds at 3 times from 2020 to this past spring. And they're sold when the bills of the construction work come due. When they're sold, we create a 20-year principal and interest payment schedule to pay back those bonds at the rate that's negotiated at the time of the sales. And so, I don't know, that's my technical off. So we'll probably have the bonds that we just sold will be 19 years, and earlier ones are probably 15 years, 14 years, about there. So they'll be paid off at that time. And then, if approved, the $507 million likely also will be 3 different bond sales. But until we get the final plans, which we don't have, and the timing of when those bills come due, we won't know that. But that's how that's structured. Okay. If you have more questions, Jen will collect. We'll go on.
Who is the point person that put this, from you guys, put this whole report for the facilities together?
The facilities condition report?
Yeah.
There was a team of us. I was part of that team.
Well, who's the lead on that? There was a work group. I don't think there really was a lead on that. I mean, I was involved only because of the finance end, and Jen was on the work group. It was Madison's staff, including building services. Another thing, you said you had Findorf walking through, isn't that like having a fox in a chicken coop? Because they'll end up, they get all the contracts for remodeling their schools.
I don't think it's like having
Well, they
the
did
fox in
East
the
High
chicken
School,
coop.
They did La Follette, they did,
Findorf was the construction management firm for 2020. But like any project, there's an RFP, request for proposals. The vendors come in and bid for that work, and Findorf won the bid.
yeah, so
right?
you're having them come in and tell you, what, oh, do this, you need a new.
I think if you talk to anybody in the field of private sector or public sector construction, they'll tell you
That's where I am.
Findorf is a top-notch construction
I
company that
understand that.
knows their business. But yeah, they won the bid for 2020.
I know when the bid for this too, it was around, I guess.
Well, I think you hit it right on the head when you said you guess, right? It'll be an RFP, it'll be a competitive process.
Well, they already have the inside draft.
No, they don't have the inside track. They're a construction firm that's very good at what they do, and I'm sure they'll put a bid in, but they don't have the inside track. It's a competitive public process. Yeah.
And your name again was?
I'm Bob Soldner, Assistant Superintendent for Financial Services, Madison Metropolitan School District.
Spell your last name,
Soldner.
Was that Z as in zebra?
D as in dog.
Oh,
Sold, Soldner, N-E-R.
all right, thanks.
Sure. All right. We talked a little bit about the facility condition report. So the 10 schools that were recommended, the first focus was the mechanicals. The mechanicals are the upper right of the squares, the open squares. There's more detail on our website, and there's detail for each one of these buildings on the facility condition report. But you'll see the common theme on all of them in terms of the conditions was mechanical, HVAC, mechanical plumbing, and then accessibility issues, right? That helped us focus on the middle schools we wanted to focus on. I mentioned the 2 elementary schools, Anana and Crestwood. Both are recommended for renovation. The other buildings are recommended to build new. This is the map I was talking about in terms of the geographical spread of the buildings across the district. The only thing we know for certain in terms of our recommendation and decision is we know we're going to start with the Malcolm Shabazz City High School and Sherman Middle School. Why? Because that's the remaining high school that the board committed to focus on. The other ones, we're going to continue. We're finishing up this week our 3rd phase of our public input to help inform us based on community input and school input, the teachers, which facility we will work on with Sherman Shabazz, right? But as I said, you can see they're geographically located throughout the district. And again, 12 middle schools currently in operation. This question to the public is for 5 middle schools, 4 elementaries, and then the Shabazz High School. Why it matters in terms of the input that we're doing with the school communities and the plan that we have with the 507 is we want to do 2 sites to start with. 2 sites means it could be 3 schools, it could be 4 schools, right? Sherman Shabazz and some other site. The way we will work the planning, we're starting to put bids out now in terms of services, would be construction to begin in spring of 2026. That allows us to do a couple of things. It allows us to continue to work with the specific school communities and the neighborhoods that are going to be impacted by those first 2 sites. That won't begin, the work won't begin until the spring of 2026. That also allows us then to continue to seek input for the remainder of the sites, to have staff input in terms of accessibility issues, how they would like the cafeterias and the gymnasiums, the layouts of the schools. And then the other thing, which I consider at this point in the planning process the most complicated, which is another reason why we're geographically spread out, is this notion of swing spaces, which means what do we do with the students and the staff when we begin work on the facilities? For the 4 comprehensive high schools, we worked on those basically over 3 years. And as those projects were going on, we just cordoned off sections of the school, and the staff and students continued to be there. That worked pretty good for high schools. It was manageable. It wasn't the best of conditions, but it worked. Nobody, in terms of the district and our recommendation to the board, and our private partners, Findorf, PRA, the other architectural firms, believes you can do that with middle schools and elementary schools. So that means as we work to build a new school, we're likely going to retain the existing school to be able to be used as a possibility as we work on the other schools. The other options are to use the schools where we have space, as we talked about, but those families would have to be bused to that neighborhood. Transporting kids is expensive. That's another option. And the third option is to buy those modular classrooms where you put them on site, right? So that's the consideration of the swing spaces, which is complicated, but we'll work to figure that out. And the way we've structured it right now, if approved, we have the time to come up with a plan that will work and meet the needs of the students and the staff and the families impacted by the construction. All right, we talked a little bit about this, but this is just to kind of bring it back to what this is all about. It's about modernizing our educational facilities, right? To modern standards, to have our kids ready to compete in the global environment. It's really It's really providing the opportunities through the facilities. We're talking about this great facility here, is at the Badger Rock, the Community Connection, and Southside Elementary School. It matters the kind of facility kids are going to school. And it matters for staff the kind of facilities you're teaching in, right? So although it is about bricks and building and renovating, it really is investing in the kids and the education that Madison provides. So that's the focus. Here's the $507 million, talk about over 23 years because of the anticipated sale of the bonds over 3 different times over the 5 years of the construction phase. There will be no impacts if approved in fall of 2024 for the facilities question, right? Because we won't sell bonds and we won't have to begin paying back until the fall of 2025. So when that happens, we're estimating to be about $27 a month beginning next fall, and to stay at that level for some time. The unknown about that is it's really difficult, given my explanation of school finance, to be able to truly predict what taxes are going to be even 4 years old. Honestly, I couldn't really predict what taxes are going to be this year, right? And it's because of the way school law is set up. State law says to school boards, your school year starts on July 1, pass a preliminary budget in June, that'll hold you over until we tell you on October 15th, this year, October 15th, how much money we're going to provide in state aids to you. When we give you that, we're going to take your third Friday in September account, this past Friday, we're going to use that count to tell you what your revenue limit will be for this year, 24-25. Now, that makes budgeting for this year very difficult, right? Because we're still waiting for critical pieces in terms of what is our total revenue and what is the amount of state aids. You need to know the amount of state aids, so the board needs to know how much authority they have to raise taxes when they vote at the end of October, right? And that's just this year. And so you have to estimate, predict the future of what the legislature is going to do in terms of the revenue limit. I talked to you about some of the changes that have happened to that formula over the years. The amount of money the legislature wants to appropriate for state aids, and then what property value is going to do, and what our enrollments are going to be, right? Madison continues to outpace the state in terms of economic development and property value growth, but is that going to continue next year, 2 years or 3 years down? Really hard to predict. But we'll look at that every year, as we do.
Doesn't the state give you an estimate earlier than October 15th?
The state's required to give an estimate on July 1, and then they give you the final number on October 15th. The formula is complicated where the estimate usually is pretty decent, unless what I like to call our breakpoints in the formula. The formula takes the money the state provides, and based on your property value per child and your cost per child, the state will make that numbers go up or down at 3 different levels of cost. And so for the most part, you can try to estimate and be pretty close, which is what we did for the board for the June budget. But we won't know our final amount in the final budgets until October 15th. So these 4 referendum questions, and I want to talk a little bit about revenue lines, but first I want to talk about the operating referendum. Remember I talked about how it's scaffolded up over 4 years? So these are annual amounts, estimated, projected. So in the end, it starts at 317 and ends at 1,050. And then the facilities referendum, as I talked about, doesn't have a tax impact until fall of 25. And we're estimating it to be about $327 for some years forward. But until we really get the full impact, it's difficult to really project much out past 4 years. When I say difficult, I mean it's really impossible. But you make an estimate and kind of try to look what's happened in the past to project the future, right? So those are those impacts.
Does that red box assume only bond set number 1?
That's an estimate in terms of levying an amount to have to pay the principal and interest moving forward across the years of the sale. So these numbers are taken in isolation to something called revenue limits, right? And we really don't know what the base revenue limit calculation is gonna be. So it's a little complicated, but it's worth spending a little time just to kind of grasp, right? So this revenue limit number, as I said, is based on a 3-year rolling average. It's the total revenue our board can have, combination of state aids and property tax levy. Just like the legislature did back in 2010 when they cut revenue limit, right? So they cut revenue limits 550 statewide on average, right? So if a board, say, would have passed operating referendum for 550 a kid, right? And thought that the voters approved it, and that's what they would get, 550. But if the state comes in and takes 550 from the base calculation, when the board was expecting 550, the board really gets no increase in revenue limits. Not because the voters didn't approve an increase to revenue limits, because the legislature controls the base. And every 2 years, they budget every 2 years in Wisconsin at the state level. They have the authority to change that base, and that base is based on enrollment projections, right? So it's a moving target, is what I'm saying. But this allows us to say, whatever that revenue limit calculation, it would be 30 million on top of that. And so if there's a change where the legislature says, we're taking some money back, you get that 30 million, but that 30 million might be zero in terms of an increase, right?
So Bob, when you extrapolate that out another 5 or 10 years, does any of this ever go away?
The operating dollars that we're asking for builds the base permanently, sustainable revenues ongoing, right? There's different ways that revenue limit base can change by the legislature, right? Here's another example. Several years ago, the legislature said, school boards, we want to increase private school vouchers, right? Which they can through the state legislature. They make the laws. But what they said to school districts are, we're going to take the money it costs to pay a private school voucher for folks that are your residents, and we're going to take that money out of your state aids allocation. But what we're going to allow you to do is raise your taxes by the equivalent of that money you're going to lose in aids, right? And so that's $10, $12 million on our property tax to pay those private school vouchers, right? That's an act of the legislature. The legislature has in the past taken some of those programs funded that way and said, you know what, it's our program, we're going to use state dollars. Districts, you don't have to levy for that anymore, you can keep your state aids, right? If that changes, that revenue limit picture will go down, right? We won't have the authority to tax for the loss of state aids. Those are the kind of changes that are policy decisions made by the legislature that will impact us, right? And then as your enrollment declines, right, the revenue limits are set up where you lose more revenue than you could possibly reduce your costs. So if your enrollment continues to decline, your total revenue limit picture will continue to shrink. Remember the video was showing like a graphic where it was kind of decreasing? 2/3 of the districts in Wisconsin have declined in enrollment, right? When revenue limits were created, everyone was increasing. It was never contemplated where we are at today, right?
So the bottom line with all of this is how do you as a senior citizen that's fixed income, how do we afford this? Plus the city wants a referendum as well.
Yeah.
I just think it's unsustainable. I was telling the foundation folks behind me here that I would sooner be writing a check to them where I could get a tax write-off for it and let them help fund your school. We've got a mixed up system here.
We do.
It's not working very well.
I
The fact
think
that the school board did not want to come in and say, we've got an enrollment decline, or we're flat. We've got openings in the schools. If that school board would have said, we're going to ask you for this money, but we're also going to close 3 or 4 schools, it would have been much more palatable to the public.
Well, first couple of things. One, thanks for sharing that. 2, every board meeting at the end of each month that has public input sessions. So, I encourage people to come, right? People come, they give their thoughts. But a little bit about the system in terms of the financing at the state level. And so I always like to explain school finance and then say, under current law, it's up to us to fund our local public schools. And the only way you're going to do it, and the data will show you, because it's statewide, right? It's not just Madison. School boards across our state continue to go to referendum to generate the revenues needed to run a public school. Now, the hope is, with fair legislative districts that the Supreme Court has required, over time, we'll return to a system where the people that are representing us represent the communities that they live in, right? I've been in school finance for a long time, from the late 90s, when the revenues were first put in as temporary, right? And I like to tell people, some of the biggest supporters of public school funding were rural Republican legislators, because they knew what made Wisconsin strong. The state sharing in the cost of the local public school, regardless of the tax base that exists. Madison has a strong tax base. A lot of rural areas don't have a strong tax base, and they wouldn't be able to operate without the state sharing in those costs, right? We need to return to those days that we used to live in Wisconsin. And we're only going to do that if there's a change at the state level. A little bit on the financing of Wisconsin, the way the law works.
Coach has a few questions as well.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about, in terms of school finance, what it means in Madison. Remember that video when it started, it said state aid, and they showed a little like 2 drops coming out, and then they said property taxes, and it was like an avalanche full of water coming out of the property tax side? That's intentional. The way the state law works is Madison schools are supported 90 cents on the dollar by the property tax, 10 cents from state aid, right? And so that means our public schools are supported 90% on the property tax and 10% from state aids. That's a decision by the legislature, right? But that's our reality, right? So under current law, the only way you get to maintain your schools in Madison in terms of ongoing revenues and the ability to invest in new things is to ask the voters for permission, which is what the board has done. All right, Carletta, do you want to answer some questions? Give me a little bit of a break. Here's the mic. Carletta's losing her voice. Thank you, Dr. Ames.
All right, so I can start off with this, and then Bob, if you want to jump in. But these questions are 3 questions that are mainly around safety and security in schools. And I just want to point, and then what part does that play in the referendum? And I just want to point out on this form here, or in this pamphlet here, if you look at the facilities, $5.7 million, we do call out on that last paragraph. Not only are we looking at the heating and cooling and plumbing, but and enhancing accessibility, but also the safety in our buildings as well. So if you look at the buildings that we just did the referendum from in 2020, all of those buildings now have welcome centers. So those are intentional spaces where we can welcome any visitors, parents, community members that are coming into the building prior to them having access to the entire building. And so when we're thinking about the build new or renovate, that is part of that plan as well, is those welcome centers. Safety and security is a priority for us, and we're always looking at ways which we can improve the safety and security of our buildings. And so that includes things such as the training of our staff that we've been able to do around safety and security. Also Salto locks that we have on all of our doors now. And we're looking at the systemic ways that we can also enhance security for all of our buildings. And so we have something now that you might have heard of called Visitor Aware. And that is a new system that we put into place with all of our visitors, where you have to actually come, put your ID into the system, picture of your face so that you're recognized. And it's better than the system that we had before where you just kind of came in and signed your name and then went where you wanted to go. And so now we have a way to be able to track who's in our buildings, but also to be able to have all of that on record by making sure that we're collecting IDs. And that's what you have as our new system.
But that's visitors, what about students themselves? Being protected from other students?
So talk to me more about, so how does a referendum play into?
What? No, I mean, there are fights going on in our high schools every single day. What are we gonna do about that? I mean, is any money gonna be spent on metal detectors, police officers being put back into our schools?
So the decisions around metal detectors, we have not had, and you can jump in if you'd like to as well, any conversations around metal detectors in our buildings and adding those as part of our security.
What about putting police officers back in our schools?
You want to take that
You want
one?
me to jump in?
Yeah.
We have not reopened that conversation.
Why?
We have now fully trained internal staff of support folks.
What kind of internal
Yeah,
staff?
so here's my question, have any of you guys ever spent a day, a full day in any of these high schools and watched these kids and watched what happened?
I've been to West High School a lot, and the kids like to prop open the doors and let people in.
So you're telling me these kids, like, you do realize these welcoming centers is a joke? Because all you gotta do is go in and just have it propped open and any kid can get it. So metal detectors have never been a conversation whatsoever, why is that? Considering these kids are bringing loaded guns to school.
And of course, that kind of thing would enhance the referendum as well. I mean, if there was some conversation that said, we're going to install metal detectors as part of this upgrade,
But
or
we're
they have
why is
SRO
that not
officers.
included as part of the referendum, safety for the students in the schools?
Right, but it's not spelled out.
Well, we know that, that's why we're
That's
asking.
what I'm asking, why hasn't it been considered, why
Yeah.
is it not in there, that's what I'm asking. Because it's getting worse on a lower level with these kids, it's going into middle school, it's going into elementary school, why has it not been talked about? That's what I want.
Yeah, it's hard to answer why we haven't talked about that. Right now, we do get, as a school board, we get updates when there's serious situations taking place, so we're aware of that. And we also get updates in school response and post-police response.
I would suggest the school board visit some schools and see what goes on.
Yes, because you said serious situation.
Yeah.
Well, what is serious?
So I guess I want to respond to that first. So I'm Navistonian, just like all of you. My son just graduated from East a couple of years ago. I'm really aware of what goes on in our schools. That is part of why I actually ran for school board. And then once I have this new perspective of getting lots and lots of information on a weekly basis, I will say that it is so much more complicated than I ever could have imagined from the outside. And so it's hard for me to answer very quickly any of your questions because there's so many different layers to everything that you're asking. It's not that I'm saying that it's unimportant, I'm absolutely not. It's that there's so much layer and nuance to safety issues in our schools, to everything that we're talking about, that I feel like this is a much bigger conversation to be having.
So this question is, schools are also used for food pantries for families, community centers, and the CR, correct? And the answer is correct. So we have community schools that do have food pantries, and those are supported by different partnerships within the community.
Thanks, Carl. Okay, we we have a handful more cards, questions. These are good questions, by the way. I like the questions the most. Okay. The capital referendum affects only a subset of schools. Thus, more referendum are coming over 20-plus years. These will be stacked on top of each other, just as 2024 will be on top of 2020. So why not present this picture so we understand the current referendum in context? Yeah. So that's a good question. Whether more referendums will come, that's obviously a decision by a future school board. We do have the facility condition report out. I shared you a high level of the views, right? Fact of the matter is, Madison is the oldest district in Dane County. Fact of the matter is, we have 26 of our 52 schools 60 years or older, right? So will facilities continue to need work over the next 20 years? I'd say it's a pretty fair assumption to say yes. Now, in terms of the stacking of the debt in the referendum, right? There's a couple of different strategies that the board, and we'll advise the board as we sell bonds and know the rate that we're going to get. With the Fed's cutting the interest rate by 0.5%, our estimates of 6 months ago really aren't that good anymore, right? Because we should get much better deal in the market given the interest rate reduction. But how this will work is it'll be 20 years and it'll be laid out, and we'll try to keep the debt of the existing 2020 with 2024 and attempt to keep basically the tax impact similar over the life of it, right? That's one strategy, that's one goal, but those are all options for the boards to have in terms of the future, right? Last fall, the board levied a little bit more money, several $1 million more, to pay off some of the existing debt in terms of trying to defease, which is called the existing debt, to save us some interest over the terms. The board always has those options depending on where we are at with revenue and depending where we are at with the authority. So that's a decision that's made every year regarding the financing and the available revenues and the priority of those individual boards. How many referendums do we have? Will it be a tradition for a referendum every 4 years? I can't answer that, right? I don't know. A lot will happen in terms of the specifics, whether this referendum, the two referendums this fall, successful or not, will impact that answer. But that's made by each board in terms of the priorities of those boards and their decisions. Which gets us to the next question. Perfectly layered questions, Jen. Thank you for organizing these in this order. It just flows beautifully. Doesn't happen by happenstance. Thank you. What happens if the referendum does not pass? And I always like this. Be specific. Specifically, I don't get to decide that. Laura and the majority of the school board will decide what our next steps are. But I can tell you what the law allows. The law allows the school board to ask 2 questions a calendar year, right? So there's a limitation built in state law. Didn't used to be that way when the legislature first put that option into school boards. But I think the legislature didn't like school boards getting permission to raise taxes locally, so they put some limitations on how often and kind of the questions that could be asked. And so if the referendum doesn't pass, like I say, or if the referendum does pass, the first conversation I have with the board in November is, okay, you passed the budget for this school year, time to start thinking about next year. Let's start kind of projecting where revenues are going to be, which we really won't get a good sense. But based on the referendum, we'll know at least some aspects of it, right? One way or another, where those revenues are. And then the board will have to decide, right? What are their next steps, which could include going to referendum again, right? Some neighboring communities like McFarland, they're going for referendum again this fall. They had a question fail in the spring, right? right? So their board decided to retool the question and ask the voters again, which is an option. It's also an option not to ask again, right? But that's a board decision. What is the general fund and where does the money come from? In government accounting, you have to account for your dollars in funds, right? So revenues and expenditures for specific purposes. Fund 10, which is the general fund, the state sets the account chart of accounts. And Fund 10 is real easy. If the law doesn't require you to put the money in a particular fund, everything goes to the general fund or Fund 10, right? So the law says track your debt separately, gotta have a separate fund for your debt. The law says track your community recreational program separately, we have a separate fund for that. The law says track your food and nutrition, Fund 50 separately. You have to keep those revenues and expenditures separate, track that separately. So that's really only a small segment. All other monies, in terms of taxes, in terms of state aid, in terms of receipt of those federal dollars, they all go into the general fund, Fund 10. So it's the biggest fund, right? So unless the law says track it separately, everything gets put into Fund 10. And that's controlled by the state in terms of the county and the federal government. You keep mentioning the state as a big source of the problem. I want to be clear that the state has a big say in it because they set the rules of the game, and we need to live by the rules of the game, which is the law, the way I look at it. So I'm not blaming them. I'm trying to explain state law and how we have to live within that state law and what that means in terms of the consequences of state law. And honestly, my opinion is the legislature of recent times doesn't invest like they used to in public schools. I think that's a fact, right? And I think if you look at how the things I've been explaining to you tonight, most people come to that conclusion, right? They're going to give what they want to give, and that's their business, and then we have to deal with it. As I like to say, take care of your own. Your school communities need to take care of your own public local schools. While I agree the state can fix it, won't that raise state taxes, and or if we get more, some other districts will get less? I think that's true, one way of looking at it, but right now, the state has in surplus, sitting in their bank account, billions of dollars that they raise in taxes, right? And so, right now, nobody's getting any of that money. The state's sitting on that money, right? Which is it's their money, they can do what they want with it. But that is true, the way the formulas work in terms of the general aid formula. If one district gets more money, some other district gets less. That's kind of like I was explaining to you, we're 90% on property taxes and 10% on state aids. So unless the legislature appropriates more money, increases the pie or the pot of money, if it leaves it the same and changes the formula, more money will flow to us. Go ahead.
So, I pay property taxes and school taxes in the early school district. They don't seem to have this kind of problem. Is that because they just have a lower tax valuation up there and they get more state aid?
I'd have to look at Hurley. Actually, I spent 25 years of my career, where's it more? Probably more, working for the Department of Public Instruction in school finance. So there's information on the website, and I can show you where it is, and I can tell you where they're aided and what their factors, we call factors, in terms of the distribution of the monies. The other thing with Madison is we're a large district and we're a diverse district, right? Dr. Hicks talked about the diversity in our district, which is our strength, but it also comes with the need to provide more services to more students and more families, right? And in other districts that are more similar, they don't have the needs, nor do they have the diversity in terms of the program. But I'm not sure where Hurley is in the formula. What are your student projections for the future, given that, I wanted to talk about this at that last question and I forgot to. What are your student projections for future, given that parents may move their students to other districts or the voucher or private schools? Might we face school closing in over 10 years? I'll talk about projections, right? The projections recently for Madison, which is true, I think, in other districts, They're based really at, the primary driver of any projection model is birth rates. And birth rates have been down in the state, including in Madison. So normally the models say we're gonna lose, say 500 to 600 students a year. They said that last year, right? 23, 24. We ended up increasing our student enrollment in 23, 24. So although the model said you were gonna decline by 500, 600 students, depending on what model you looked at, we actually increased our students. Summer school this year was up 18% compared to summer school in 2023. We just had the third Friday count, it's a count required in state law. We feel that our registrations are at least matching the number of students we were serving in 23, 24. So even though the model shows us declining again by 500 or 600, we won't know that for certain until we get all the counts done early October. But we're optimistic, based on what we think we're looking at, that we're not gonna drop that many students, right? That's good, but it also puts a big question mark on how are we projecting our enrollment, and we're gonna continue to work with the experts that do that. But right now, we're increasing students, right? Increasing a little bit, holding steady, and we'll see what we're gonna do for this third Friday, September count. How will this affect low-income families renting apartments? I don't know, but I serve as the Madison School District representative on the Madison Plan Commission. And last night, the city did a presentation, kind of trying to do an analysis. The city has much more information in terms of assessed value, in terms of the property value within the city of Madison, because it's their job, and they track all that. They did an analysis on the value of the rental property, and I'd never seen this before. And I've been talking to the city for months about their referendum question and ours. But the city thinks about $19 or $20 a month for the average home in Madison, which is $457,300. They did an analysis on renters, which I've never seen this before. And they came up with, they assumed landlords would raise by X amount to cover the increase in taxes, and they calculated, pretty sure it was $9 a month for renters, right? So, I don't know how they came up, I've never seen that before, but I put a note on there. I gotta talk to the city finance director, see how they came up with this formula.
Yeah, so that would be so long.
Yeah,
It is so long.
so, but like I said, I don't know, but I did see that last night, so I was like, and I'd never seen an analysis like that before. But, this is the last question. You are asking a lot. We are having real challenges with housing costs, and it is a goal for several levels of government to improve. The costs of these referendum will significantly affect homeowners and renters. Some will not stay in Madison, so why ask for so much? Those are good statements and a good question, and I can only tell you the board, as I said, spent months talking about it, and came to the conclusion what the questions are asking, knowing the projected impacts. And it really comes down to operate our schools and to provide the education that we need to provide, cost revenues, right? And that's just where the community is at in terms of the board. And I know it's not an easy question, and I know it is a big ask, right? We've talked about it. But it's the acts that the board feels the district needs to provide and to continue to invest in the programs that serving the families in Madison, right?
So if I were to vote yes on one referendum, which one is the one that the school district wants the most?
I can't answer that question, right? The board has two questions, operations and facilities, both are different.
Yeah.
Which one would you?
I will answer that. So without the operating referendum, we're in pretty big trouble. The facilities one, our kids are uncomfortable in the schools, and our staff are uncomfortable, and it is impacting learning. But without the operating one, we're in really bad position.
Thank you, Laura. Laura can answer that question then.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Really good questions. I really appreciated the thought and the comments and the sharing.